This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Mr. Buck Melton. Buck, you've been with us a lot.
Indeed.
We've had interesting discussions.
Nice to keep having me.
Well, you're a very erudite guy. It's a pleasure to have you with us. We had conversations on many issues, and tonight maybe we could talk a little bit about religious freedom and
lack thereof.
Or lack thereof, and how that plays into American society and the Constitution. Now, in our Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights put in by Thomas Jefferson in many ways, am I right on that? Really played a role, or
James
no?
Madison took more of the lead.
Okay, all right. He was all right. I think he may have done something in Virginia.
He did.
He was
did
more in
indeed.
Virginia than he was in this possible.
Yes.
But in any event, in our Constitution, what do we actually say about our freedom of religion in the Constitution?
Only three things. There are three different religion clauses. There is not a separation of church and state clause. You have the religious test clause, and I believe that's in Article 6, and that simply says that there shall be no religious test required for office holding. So,
which was incidentally totally different in everywhere else.
Yes, it was.
Everywhere else you had required, yes.
Yes, and this was revolutionary, that someone who was Jewish, even theoretically someone who was atheist,
Yes.
could not be excluded from Congress or the presidency in the 1790s based on that fact, based on religion, and that one's often overlooked. We absolutely take that for granted, and that's a big one. So you've got that, and then in the First Amendment, which is of course much better known, the very first thing listed in the First Amendment is the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And that has usually been taken to mean that there will be no official state religion, no government endorsement of either a particular religion or even of religion in general. And then immediately following on the heels of that is the Free Exercise Clause. So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
And was this like antimatter, if one mattered, antimatter, in the UK at that time, as far as I understand it, particularly in regards to Catholic citizens. They had tremendous proscriptions against them attending the universities, being elected to Parliament.
Yes.
And the way the UK works was the Anglican Church was all powerful, and the head of the church was the king. So you had
Crown is still the head.
So you had which was the church was supported by taxpayers' money. And the idea was that there was one kind of monolithic structure, governmental structure, that included both religion and the government. In this case, a government that was endorsed by divine right, and America was a totally different deal.
Yes. Well, that's because many of the colonies were founded largely because of the Reformation. In the 1500s, you essentially had to be Anglican in England. If you were a dissenter, a Puritan, a separatist, then you were subversive. If you were Catholic, you were a security threat. If you were a Catholic priest, you would be hanged immediately as soon as you were caught. So rather than put up with potential subversives, the Crown simply let them leave. So we get Plymouth Colony of the Separatists. We get Massachusetts Bay for the Puritans. We get Pennsylvania for the Society of Friends.
Well, what did the Southern Baptists get, Bucky?
Oh, the Southern Baptists, when did they come along? So, yes, here we are on the
maybe
campus of Mercer
they got
University.
Georgia, I don't
Yes.
know, maybe they got Georgia, yes.
Yes. So, well, the Methodists got started in a way down on the coast.
That's
'cause
right,
Charles
yeah,
Wesley
that's right,
was,
yes, that's right,
And then
yes.
the Baptists emerged.
Because George Whitefield was out there. We had a lot
Yes.
of issues.
Whitefield, Edwards. So yes, we've had religious pluralism from the start, and it was just sort of built into our DNA as immigrants to the New World.
That's really been an extremely powerful part of
Yes.
America.
Very
the
much so.
idea that we have this religious diversity, and many people were attracted to the country. I mean, if you look at people that coming from anywhere, Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, if you're Jewish, there were lots of prescriptions against you in different
Yes,
countries.
yes.
Here, everything was quite open and free. People, the Mennonites, many people were attracted to the idea that the government is not going to get enmeshed in your religious life.
Yes, and that's another important thing to bring out, this very ubiquitous phrase, separation of church and state. This actually, if you wend your way back and trace back who uses it, it originates with Roger Williams, who was one of the original dissenters who founded Rhode Island.
Shall we say an original Baptist?
Yeah,
It's
probably
close
as
to a Baptist.
close.
I think they might take
Pretty
him.
close.
They take him for that.
Pretty
yes.
close. And of course, the way that Williams meant that statement, today the phrase tends to be uttered by secularists. Keep your lousy religion out of my government.
Yes.
But if you read Williams, it is abundantly clear that he meant it in the sense of keep your lousy government out of my religion. All you will do is corrupt my faith.
Yes.
And so I don't know about you, but when I see an American flag in a
Yes,
church
yes.
sanctuary, it makes me profoundly nervous. What is that flag doing there?
Yes.
So the idea that it does cut both ways, that there are two different realms. Now, obviously there is overlap.
Yes.
And that has raised a lot of very interesting questions in our history. But we do have the idea that government should not co-opt religion, and nor should religion co-opt the government.
Well, I think we started out in those circumstances where, I mean, it seems to work extremely well. The idea, everyone I think could accept the idea that the less government is better. That's initially the way things went, and the whole idea was that we had this endless frontier in America, thousands of acres of land just there for the taking.
That would
People
last
could-
to the 1,000th generation.
People
in
could
Jefferson's
move
words.
in, and they could just live an independent, almost hermit-like life if they
Yes.
wished to. They could be there on their land, and they could be a small husbandman, to quote Jefferson. They could, enjoy the fruits of their labor.
Yes.
They could be a fine group of yeomen that were in sort of paradisio. But the situation changed a lot, didn't it? And the government, to quote Shakespeare, upon what meat does this our Caesar feed, that he hath grown so great?
Yes.
So the government has become so powerful, and needfully so. I mean, we have to have. I mean, people would imagine the government is needed for many things. We can't have just no government at all. It's necessary to be much bigger. And when that happened, it's been intruding, I think, into the religious sphere. Not so much the contrary. It doesn't seem to me that religion is pushing too much into government arrangements.
I think it's done on a more individual basis. That when Mike Huckabee is going to run for president, a lot of people who are uncomfortable with a lot of religious affiliation with government will raise questions about whether or not he should be doing that, or what is he going to do? Is he going to force his Bible down our throats?
Yes.
But you don't see a concerted effort by the Southern Baptist Convention to do that, at least not on the national level. I mean, the moral majority may encourage people to vote a certain way, but they're not fielding a slate of candidates, not that I've known. So.
But I mean, just to talk about it, I think we can maybe address this issue. The idea is, and I think this is a fair statement, is that for a long time, people construed freedom of religion to mean a Judeo-Christian kind of culture here. So that the assumption was, when they discussed religion, they meant Judeo-Christian religion with a broad brush.
Yes.
So pretty much everybody was in that bailiwick.
Yes.
And now we have a quite different situation.
Yes.
And we have, if I could say it this way, you could say secularism almost amounts to religion, and we certainly have many people of all kinds of different faiths, particularly Islamic people. They're Buddhists, they're Hindus, there are all sorts of people here that don't fit the traditional mode, and that's causing some issues. I would say problems is the wrong word, but it's causing conflicts and tensions.
Yes, and keep in mind that the common law system that we use to adjudicate problems and issues and sort out rights and duties was coming out of a pastoral, rural society, medieval society that had a lot more elbow room
Yes.
than we've got now. A big, high-tech, fundamentally urban, industrialized society. So people are going to jostle each other a lot more, and you have a lot more of these conflicts. And what do you do with that? One of the best things I ever studied was when I was a young lad studying civil rights. The casebook starts with a passage describing thuggee, which is an Indian religious cult that involves the ritual killing of other people.
Right.
And then the question is posed after this account: can the state limit this? If you truly, really believe in freedom of religion, the answer would be yes. So obviously there are going to be some limits on religious practice. The question then becomes, where are those limits properly found? Where do we draw those lines? And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Well, that's complicated, isn't it?
It is
because the law, if you want to say natural
Yes.
law, whatever, one could imagine the Christian ethical system plays a major role in the whole idea of the country, the
Yes.
establishment of the country, the way it behaves. The gravitas that keeps the country together has, in many ways, a strong Christian imprint. And weakening that imprint, in some ways, causes a lot of centrifugal disarray in the country and makes making a national policy more difficult.
Yes. Well, let's look at that for a minute. And I've got a few hypothetical questions for you to try to figure out these lines.
Okay, well,
All right.
I'm good at hypotheticals.
So the religious test clause, you cannot tell someone that he is not eligible to Congress because of his religion or lack thereof. So a Catholic is elected, and let's make it to president. He's elected president, and he immediately says, well, as a Catholic, I cannot enforce laws that are pro-choice. Now, where do you draw the line there? I mean, he's not been barred from office because of his faith, but the minute he tries to act on that faith, there may be a constitutional question. Is he faithfully going to execute abortion clinic access laws?
Well, you could make the case that, my answer to that would be that the government requires secular behavior. So if it's true enough, religion enters into it, and if a person is not, and one can respect these religious viewpoints, but if in fact you're not going to enforce the laws or not exercise what the Constitution requires for the political office, then you'll probably be removed.
So you can be anything you want so long as you actually don't adhere to it. You can profess to be anything you want. Here's another
well,
one.
Within the limits demarcated by law,
Yes.
and the conflict's not always so obvious.
Yes. Here's another one. Let's step outside that Judeo-Christian framework for a minute.
So you had an easy answer to that, no problem.
Yes, yes. You are Native American.
Yes.
You're a member of a tribe, and we'll even make you full-blooded. And you have been, and your father and your grandfather and great-grandfather have been following a native tribal religion that involves the ingestion of peyote, which is hallucinogenic.
Sure.
And you work for the state government in a drug rehab clinic, and you are a peyote user, and the state wants to fire you.
Yes.
What's the result there?
Well, it's the scales, the way the courts balance these things. So what you really get into is which is a normal thing, collision of rights. So these rights brush up against each other. They clash like tectonic plates, and when they clash, the courts attempt to sort of define the result of the clashing. So they put some kind of system in place.
Yes.
Now, whether the system is right or wrong, and it could be capricious and arbitrary, they put something there. And these capricious and arbitrary legislation often makes the country work. However, it would depend on the time that these rules appear.
Yes.
So if you're in a state of, let's say, if you're a despised person and your religion is a despised religion and only worthy of lower people, then probably the government would give you a nip. They would think, well, in some ways, beneath the surface, you're a sinner. You're whatever, sacrificing, I don't know, goats, and we just don't. That's against animal rights. You can't sacrifice goats. Goats are protected creatures.
Actually, the court came down on the other side of that.
You
one.
can't sacrifice goats.
Santeria, I believe.
But I mean, so what I'm saying is the way these disputes are resolved depends on the circumstances of the time and the majority opinions in many ways. So if the country is a very religious, it's in a state of reality where concern over the afterlife or appropriate religious behavior, that's a big deal, then I think the decision would tilt towards adhering to religious principles. In a more secular time, it would be the converse of that. And you can see what, I think if you examine the court decisions, you might see something along those lines. The courts are attempting to carve out special privileges for different minorities. So that's probably what they do, is their idea is they're trying to minimize the power of majority will, and particularly the older majority, which they assume has inappropriately dominated the country. So I think you could say the courts are saying the Christian majority of European descent has inappropriately dominated the country. It is our job to carve out new privileges and new rights for people that are demanding their own place. A place in the sun is too hyperbolic, but they have their own privileges and eat peyote or do whatever. Any comments? I threw that ball back.
No, it's a hard one, and there are some people who argue, and you hear this more. I've not heard this so much in religion the way you've done it now, but more on racism. That the race that has been in the driver's seat, that has had its hands on the levers of power and has passed the segregational legislation or something, that only they can be racist. That the racial groups that are not in power, that have never been empowered and don't have much leverage, they cannot be racist because they are essentially trying to claim that place in the sun that you were trying to say. I'm not sure. That may be a dangerous road you're trying to take us down. Back to the government of laws.
Well, I'm not trying. I
So.
mean, the comment is maybe I'm not trying to go do that, but that seems to be often what occurs. And so how do you, and this is a rather complicated sort of subject, isn't it? How do you parse out in this traditional, in our country, religion, free exercise religion is a huge deal. Everybody believes in that. That's the whole nature of the country. That's one of the things that differentiates the country from other places, European countries. It also makes it possible for the country to be more religious, I think, than elsewhere. They're not contaminated by being too closely entwined with corrupt governments.
Yes.
So the separation of the checks and balances, a religion that is, or a religious ethical group that's immune from government influence, has the ability to criticize roundly government behavior and morally limit intrusive government.
Yes, unless the government has granted it tax-exempt status, as long as it doesn't criticize the government. That's a scary proposition. Well, yes, if you're a church, you can be tax exempt as long as you don't endorse a particular candidate.
I'm kidding.
Yeah,
so that's another way. No, I'm kidding. And so what's happened is the government is only loosely, it pretty much lets the churches do pretty much what they would like.
Yes.
And there's probably some limit. It's they really let them go to the 5-yard line on that. I mean, they really let that happen.
Okay. Now, what about criticism of religion? What about drawing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad and not in a very good light?
That's right. So now we're getting into we sort of headed to this direction with our conversation. The idea of religion is not in conflict with the national identity, not in conflict with this traditional kind of viewpoint. If you're in a South Georgia town from the old days, well, you could be a Methodist, a Baptist, or you could be a Presbyterian, or Holiness Church, whatever, Pentecostal. I mean, there were like choices that were sort of choices for the same thing in a way. There's subtle differences, and but these theological issues of some consequence. But really, I mean, people could share opinions. But if you have the idea that there's another kind of viewpoint that's that's an extremely intense viewpoint, and this viewpoint is so powerful, people that adhere to it, some people could say, my viewpoint requires me to be to do heinous deeds, I mean, to other people's minds.
Yes.
And how do you respond to that?
Yeah, and then it's a question of, does your belief motivate you so strongly that you are heedless of the coercive power of the state? You are willing not only to kill but to die.
Yes.
What authority does the state have over you at that point? What do we do with that? And then are we not back to England and Catholics in the 1500s, that you are dealing with a national security threat that has its base in religion? That's a scary situation.
Well, and the question is, I mean, to get to a resolution of such problems, you know, I think it's necessary to have a substantial amount of theological wisdom.
Yes.
So, and the conversation that takes place is unfortunately often in the hands of politicians who are being influenced by what the media is talking about.
Yes.
So, a heinous act that causes some very prescriptive reaction from the government, from politicians, that we have to wonder, is that the correct thing? What does one do in these circumstances?
Yes.
It's something we maybe haven't had the nation hasn't had too much experience with that.
I know, and it's very troubling. You hear a lot right now about President Obama not even really wanting to criticize ISIS on a religious basis. He simply calls it extremism. That when Egyptian Christians are executed because they're Christians,
yes,
he simply says they are Egyptian citizens who are being killed. He makes no reference. And I can understand his hesitance to do that. I think he's being a little bit too circumspect. It becomes comical after a while. He does have a point that last July, over 100 imams wrote the heads of ISIS, and they said, look, we know Islam and you ain't it.
Yes.
And you're scandalizing the faith. So I can sympathize a bit with Obama, but he needs to understand that whether or not ISIS is truly representative of what Islam is all about, they claim they are truly representative of what Islam is about. It's a religious motivation, whether or not for good or ill, and we have to confront that.
Well, so, I mean, we can go back. I mean, the viewpoint, if you thought that your soul was in peril or someone else's soul
yes.
was in peril, and if you didn't act in a very stringent way, strong way, then people would do that. They'd act that way, and that's been the history of Christianity in many
yes.
ways.
Yes.
I mean, people could say the religious wars of the 16th century, the 30-Year War, all these just terrible people have killed each other for religion, all sorts of things that happened in the past, and that's part of the Christian history in many ways.
Yes.
So how do you deal with that? It's a very complicated thing, and can you? So what I'm really sort of getting into a little bit is the freedom of religion, the way the Constitution is put together. Can the government restrict or close down, let's say, mosque, or
yes.
they say we're closing your mosque, we're not going to let you to go in there, or there's a particular preacher, imam, I got that right,
yes.
whatever,
yes.
okay, Islamic religious figure, that is advocating some, I guess, crimes against the state,
yes.
if you want to say it that way.
Yes.
And can the government arrest the guy? Can it close things? Can it close
yes.
down things? Can there be religions like you as the way you started the conversation, the thuggery in India? Can
yes.
the government stop, just
yes.
suppress religion
yes.
if it threatens the state?
I would say yes to a degree, and you have to be careful with that though. When you're talking about shutting down someone or arresting him because of what he's preaching, you're moving a little bit away from free exercise of religion and into free speech. I will tell you the current rule as to when speech can be, when religions can be restricted, and this is a test that goes back 50 or 60 years, and this is also the test that is being reaffirmed by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that the General Assembly has been debating. The first question you ask is, are we dealing with a sincere religious belief? Are there indications, is there evidence that this believer who is claiming that he's being persecuted, is it a sincere religious belief? If it is not, then do what you want to him. But if it is sincere, if he can show evidence that he's been a churchgoer for 30 years, he's tried to live his faith, then the state has got to show a couple of things. It's got to show that it has a compelling interest in doing whatever it is that it is doing.
Yes.
Not just some interest or a
Yes.
faint interest,
Yes.
but national security would be a good one. And that it has chosen the least restrictive possible means to achieve that in dealing with this person. And if the state cannot show those two things, it's overreaching. So, if an imam is in a mosque in downtown Atlanta and he's preaching hatred and advocating that everybody there should go out and kill a Christian, and then they all go and party and go to bed.
Ignore the guy, yeah.
And what happens? Under free speech, that's the government probably can't touch that. You have to have advocacy that amounts to incitement, and that incitement has got to be on a hair trigger, that there's got to be no grounds or time for reflection, that it's a flash mob, people are angry, and then the imam yells, there's some Christians, go kill them right now, and the crowd rushes over and tries to kill. In that case, you can shut them down. But what about just preaching? What about...
Well, that's right. And so we get into communication and the what actually is religion. There's some religions you would say, well, it just here's the God's word, and you just go out and meditate upon it, and then live by the written teachings, and that's. But other situations require some kind of coming together of adherence to a particular religious belief, and then having interchanges and a common policy.
Yes.
So we get, and then that policy can have an impact on the social values of the country.
Well, I've been mulling this over, and it strikes me that one of the real power of religion is you're willing to die for it, that something, you'll be rewarded or move on to a plane of existence where the state has no jurisdiction. It can exercise no coercive authority over you. But how about religion that you're willing to kill for? And we will take materialist humanism, a belief that does not profess a belief in a soul or an afterlife. So you may not be willing to die for that, or even if you are, it doesn't give you any pecuniary good, but you still can kill for that, theoretically. That nationalism is, in a way, the bloodiest religion that humans have ever invented.
God may nunc, and so you can have the religion often is used to justify national policy.
Yes,
I mean, that's and maybe in the Middle East we can see examples of different religions there saying our national policy, God is on the side of our national policy.
Yes.
Whether it be Israel or whether it be Iran. I mean, you could or the Sunnis, as far as that goes. The ISIS would say that.
Yes.
So isn't that one of the problems we're facing? Is that religion is empowering nations to aggressively respond to one another. God is telling the nation what to do here, and if you...
Yes, that religion, or that most religions that we could name off the top of our heads, they are not limited to what happens after this life or beyond this plane of existence, that they project into this reality, into how individuals relate to each other. I mean, you find that in the Torah, you find it in the Quran, you find it in the New Testament, you probably find it in the Taoistic religions, the Dharmic religions. I'd say just about anything.
Yeah,
so secular humanism, what is humanism? It's a meditation on the human condition. So.
Well, Bucky, we've had a good chat tonight. It's certainly been very thought-provoking. We'll have to continue on this, but it's not an easy subject.
Not at all.
Is it? That is good. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.